Hello there, Parth Sharma this side, bringing you best chess games going all around the world. Do take time to like, comment, share, and subscribe to my channel. If you are already subscribed, then do press the bell icon for future notifications. And if you like my work, then do consider supporting me on Patreon and PayPal. You will find the links in the description because your support is my motivation, which keeps me going. And if you want to watch a specific game that I'm covering, then you can find them on the timestamps so that you can jump straight to the game that you want to watch. So, the first semi-final from Chessable Masters tournament was between Magnus Carlsen and Ding Liren, and it was some fight. This is a key position in game 1, and as you can see, it is a draw, but the question is how to prove it a draw. Carlsen has played rook to b3, and Ding Liren responds with rook a2. After king b6, tragedy struck Ding Liren as he lost connection to his internet, and slowly time just went down and to 0, and he lost on time. What a tragedy this was for Ding Liren. This was indeed a drawish position. For instance, if Ding had played f5, white pushes a6, this pawn looks very threatening. It actually is. Then black plays g5. You can say so many pawn moves without any advancement, and this pawn will rush through to the promotion square and get a queen, or I should say become a queen. a7. What's the point? G takes f. G takes f. There is no hurrying in making a queen. King takes f. Now king b7, so if you queen, then rook takes, then king would be able to capture the rook. And now h5, this is the point. White gets a queen, rook recaptures the queen, king takes, and now this king is way too far away from the action, and I'm afraid you can try any sort of thing, and this is a draw because black cannot get his king away. For instance, if he plays king to f3, then rook to h8 attacks this pawn, so the king has to come back to the g file, but then white rook checks it again, and if he goes to, let's say, king to h3, then you can play rook to f8 attacking the pawn, so the game would end in a draw. However, after king b6 by Magnus, Ding Liren lost the game due to disconnect. So we come to game 2, and yeah, this was also a very interesting game. Ding is white, and what does Carlsen do? He gives his queen incredibly, because he said it was unfair to Ding that he would lose the first set in that way due to disconnect, so he would rather give it back so that after games 2 the score stays level. So in games 3 and 4 it was a neck-to-neck fight, but those games also ended in a draw. The first game between the first Blitz game was also a draw. So we come to the second Blitz game, and here Ding is again white and Magnus is black. So it's pretty clear that the winner will win the first set of the semi-finals of Chessable Masters, and Ding has white in this very crucial game. So without further ado, let's jump onto the game. Scores are level, everything is level. The winner wins the first set. c4 by Ding, e5, g3, knight f6, bishop g2, bishop c5, all very well known. This was, I think, played by Fabiano quite a lot with the intention of putting this bishop to b6, and we have seen this kind of variation played in the English Opening. So anyway, d3, castles, knight to c3, developing the queen's knight. That's very important. And normally in these positions, let's say after h6, which was played in the game, knight f3, instead of knight f3, you might see sometimes bishop to e3 played, but the situation is that this bishop is on c5, it's not on e7, so whenever that happens, the bishop is either not developed or, especially I would say, not on c5 square, giving this bishop e3 development. So now knight f3, the pawn is attacked, and probably the best way should have been to play d6 with the intention of developing this bishop, let's say to f5 or to e6 would have been a better choice. Rook e8 seems pretty natural, but it comes with a cost of development. Normally you might see black playing this bishop to f8 sometimes, although not in this case, but still a move worth reconsidering. And actually in this position, being castle, well, it's surprising that he didn't take the pawn. And if rook takes, you can play d4, forking the bishop and the rook. But black also has its own shot with bishop takes f2 check. So he gives the piece this way, takes the pawn back. So both sides have 7 pawns each. d4, then rook e8, then rook f1. d6 is the intention to develop, and after king g1, knight b d7, black would still have a good position. And after this artificial castling, as you may see, this king has come from here to here, not directly to g1. The position still looks reasonably level, but the problem is this backward e pawn, which can become a weakness in the future. So after rook e8, being castles, knight takes e5 was an idea well worth considering, but nevertheless. d6, protecting that pawn. Now d4, e takes d, knight takes d. c6 is to stop knight b5, any knight coming to b5 for that matter. And in case if this bishop gets attacked, this bishop might find its good home on c7 square. b3, just to fianchetto this bishop on this long diagonal. Intention is to fianchetto both of these bishops. a5 by Magnus, bishop to b2, there we go. Knight to a6, because if you play knight here, then this hinders the development of this bishop, and in subsequent time would hinder black's queenside development. Queen to d2, queen e7, so putting pressure here, although not a threat at the moment, but still just to let white know that if you make any mishaps, I would be targeting your weakness on this e pawn. But this weakness actually can disappear by playing e3, but this would, as I say, well, then the queen won't have access to this diagonal because of that blockade on e3. So anyway, rook a to d1, developing the queen's rook, bishop to d7, h3, bishop b6, e4, now pushing that pawn 2 squares further, and after knight to c5, it looks like the position is still equal, and this Blitz game would also end in a draw. Rook f to e1 is giving more protection to this pawn. You can see so many pieces are barraging down to this e4 pawn, at this e4 pawn. Bishop, knight and rook are defending this pawn, so you might see 4 attackers, 3 defenders, but the third attacker, 3 to 3, is the queen, so that's why sufficient defense. And f3 won't be possible because that would run into the spin, and that would be very nasty. So rook a to d8, king to h2, making sure that he can play f3 so that this knight doesn't stand into the spin. And also he has he's intending to play one move which I didn't like at all. After bishop c8, Ding plays knight to f5. when you look at this move, you see like knight is actually attacking the queen, but the knight itself is attacked by the bishop, which is what happened. Bishop takes and e takes f5. You can see, although the rook is attacking the queen, but this pawn is somewhat a weakness in this position for white, because it is a double pawn with no e pawns on the board, and the king is on this side, and if you advance g pawn or h pawn, the things can look really risky for this white king. And Carlsen tries to take advantage of this. He plays queen to c7, placing this queen in this diagonal. So if g4, then d5 would be check. A very important resource in this position. So Ting simplifies, the knight takes. Well, Carlsen actually can take this with the rook and position would still be fine, but the pawn would be hanging, and that's the point. So he has to take it with the knight. So knight e2, knight d7, just opening bishop's line to this pawn. Knight to f4, so queen is defending the pawn. Knight e to f6. So basically what black is trying to do, I should say white is trying to do, is to try to pounce on this weakness, maybe try to put a lot of attackers. White has I would say good structure in this position. This f5 pawn, as I already mentioned, is a weakness worth considering. And if you, let's say, queen d7 sort of moves come, then this pawn is looking really shaky. Queen to c2, so he provides a defender to this pawn, although not attacked, but still a provisional defender is a must. So queen to e7, taking the open file. Rook to d2, putting more defenders now, so making sure that this queen can move stably, and this rook keeps defending this f2 pawn. So rook to d7, he doubles the rook. I would say he puts the rook one step up, so he wants to put this queen back and then try to push this pawn on d5 to just clean the smoke. I should say to clear the smoke. Bishop to f3, queen to d8, there we go. Queen to d1, Ting also does the same. Bishop to c7, now he puts this bishop opposite to this king. The function that queen was serving, now it's bishop's turn to serve that very same function. Knight comes to d3, rook to e7, now rook takes the open file. King to g2, so the king gets out of this provisional pin. Queen to c8, now putting pressure on this pawn, and now g4. So that was the point, getting out of this, because d5, as I said, would be check. Knight to h7, rook comes to e2, so rooks are traded. After rook takes e7, queen takes e7. Ting offers a queen trade in this position, which I thought that it would have been preferable for Magnus, just to trade queens, but the position of this bishop would have been compromised, because this bishop would lose, I would say, somewhat a tempo, and Carlsen could have taken the queen, as I said, for that matter. But anyway, queen d8, king to g1, knight e to f6, still so far so good. Bishop comes to g2, knight f8, bishop to d4, knight 8 to d7, queen comes to e3, bishop to b6, so now bishops get traded, and so are the queens. And f4 by Ting. So the problem here for Ting is that Carlsen has 4-3 majority of the queen side, whereas this pawn, as I said, f5 is somewhat useless in this position unless it is used for capturing. And if Magnus tries to if Magnus succeeds in playing f6, then I would say the position for Ting would crumble, because with light square bishop you must put your pawns opposite to the bishop that your opponent has. If he only has a bishop, that's the point, because then this bishop won't be able to attack the pawns. Knight f to d7, king to f2, king f8, both sides activating their kings. g5, so he's trying to get a breakthrough, but Carlsen won't take that pawn. f6, that's amazing move indeed, just to make sure that his majority on the queen side is far more superior than Ding's majority, whereas I would say Ding doesn't have majority, and this f pawn is indeed a weakness, and if he captures either of these pawns, then I'm afraid these double pawns won't help Ding either, and that would be equivalent to just one pawn rather than two. So that's a big problem here. He plays h4, knight comes to c5, king e3, knight gets traded off, and now Carlsen activates his king. So far so good. Position looking absolutely equal, having bishops. I would say no specific breakthrough. Exchanges are going on. A takes b, and now Carlsen's famous, I would say, this famous technique that Carlsen has, and I love this technique, b5, so-called the blunder induction technique. And whenever we start to learn chess, we always try to learn these blunder induction techniques that a player has. Obviously, there are certain ways to play this position, but in blunder induction technique, there is only Magnus forces you to play just one move, which is drawing, and rest of the moves are losing. So if you're unable to pick that one drawing move, then you're gone, and b5 is one of those. And I would say it isn't like that some moves are losing. For instance, if you play this pawn takes, well, as I said, it won't help the case, because then black will have serious attacking options. And if you, let's say, take the pawn on b5, which is what I analyzed, well, in fact, this actually helps black, because in normal circumstances this pawn is on a dark square and this knight can track this pawn down. And that's not all, there is a center passed pawn, and if black manages to get rid of the minor pieces, then I'm afraid it will be the end for Ding. So b5, what a blunder induction move this is. And there is only, I won't say only move, but I would say a nice decent move is to play bishop to d3, and this probably would be good enough to draw. Let's say after knight to a6, you take the pawn on b5, knight takes, and now after b takes, king takes, the position is somewhat level. You just have to move this bishop either here or here just to preserve it, and that would be fine, because you have to realize that Carlsen will never capture the pawn on g5. But as I said, this blunder induction technique works very often, and it worked again because Ding Liren played c5, and this is a terrible blunder, because after knight to a6, if you go, let's say, king to c3, let me show you, then this is totally lost. Two connected passers with a knight, king just coming to d6, this is totally gone. Black is winning. So understandably, after knight a6, Ding takes the pawn, and now king takes, king c3, defending the pawn on b4, but I'm afraid It's to no avail. After c5, b takes, king just invades through. Bishop c2, knight b4, bishop b3, and after knight d5 check, Ding Liren resigned the game. If bishop takes, the king actually gobbles up these pawns. Otherwise, if white is going this side, then this pawn is good enough to distract the white king. With the meantime, black would eat up all these king side pawns. So Ding resigned the game. What a superb victory in set 1 by Magnus Carlsen, and it also showed his good sportsman spirit and his sportsmanship when after in the first game Ding lost due to disconnection, he happily gave away game 2 and showed that he doesn't want to win in that way. He wants to win in a fair way, because when you are at top of the peak, people do ask you questions and will say that Magnus finds cheap ways of winning, but Magnus just shuts his critic's mind, I would say critic's mouth, and at the end of the day he comes on top. So congratulations for winning set 1. Still set 2 to go. Will Ding bring a comeback in set 2? I will be coming back tomorrow. Till then, stay safe. Cheers. Bye.